Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Last Week This Morning, where Markham and I recap Energy Media's top stories from last week. Now, before we get into the stories, Markham and I are going to talk about a new initiative that we've just started, or we're going to start this week. And Markham, maybe you can tell everyone about it.
Well, we've got a Substack. We've had one for a long time. We just, with all the video work we do, we just haven't had time to put a lot of effort into it. But we're starting to do that now because we need to make arguments. We need, that about what Canada's energy policies are, where the future is going. And so late last week, we published our first essay. It's a 2,000-word essay. It's called "The Myth of Continuity: Canada's Illusion of a Safe Energy Transition." And our point in the essay, the argument is that Canada is still stuck in the 20th century when it thinks about the energy future. It thinks that the energy future will be kind of like it has been since World War II, which is, growing
Yeah,
demand and that for energy as economies in the global south expand and become more middle class, the emerging economies, especially in Asia. And so that will just continue on from now until 2050. And so when, Prime Minister Mark Carney says, "Oh yeah, we're going to make Canada a conventional energy superpower," and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says, "Yeah, we're build this massive pipelines, one to the west coast, etc." that we talk about all the time. They're stuck in the continuity contradiction, if you will. They're
hmm
thinking of energy in 20th century terms, not in 21st century terms. And the big difference, as we keep saying over and over again, is energy used to be a commodity. It was something you combusted and then you turned it into energy. Now, energy is a technology. You create it with a solar panel, a wind turbine, you store it in a battery, and then you use it in an electric vehicle or a heat pump or whatever. And it's a fundamental rupture in the global energy system, and
yeah,
China's driving it. And we pretend here in Canada like it's not happening. And this is
yeah,
a major threat because we're going to get left behind. China moves at China speed, right? And we move at 20th century speed.
yeah.
And this is a major problem. And so we laid it out as an argument in this essay, and we'll be doing more essays along that line because Canada needs to wake up. We're sleepwalking into the future. And this idea that the energy future is going to be like the energy past, hello, folks, that's not happening. That is just absolutely not happening. And whether you live in Alberta or BC and you're worried about LNG, it doesn't matter. Like this idea, we had a poll here not too long ago, right? And, 60, 70% of Canadians support a pipeline, the construction of at least one pipeline. Why?
Yeah.
They don't know anything about it. They don't know anything about pipelines. They just go, "Oh, well, Alberta wants one and we're mad at Trump and this will get our okay, so I'm in support of it." No, you should not be in support of it for precisely the reason we lay out in the essay. So anyway, this is part of what we're doing is we're going to be doing more of these essays and then some videos to explain them. We'll publish 2 per week, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to let folks know we're going to put the link to the Substack below. So you just have to go on there, subscribe, and you'll receive an email every time we publish a new post. Now, let's pivot into this week, Markham. It was there was a lot. We talked, we talked about the teachers, we talked about EVs, and actually that's where I want to start. You had Professor Dimitri Anastaskis on,
Anastasis.
and Anastaskis, sorry, from the University of Toronto, and you know, he basically talked about the slow erosion, but the long-term trajectory is inevitable. So can you tell us a little bit what he was describing there?
Well, that's right. I mean, we've already seen Stellantis making a decision to move some of its production back to the US, and there's going to be other plants, like other companies that do that,
Yeah.
in response to Donald Trump's tariffs. I mean, it seems almost inevitable now. And so the question is, And you need to go watch the video interview a little further than just the first 5 or 10 minutes, because Dimitri and I talk about, well, what should we do? And I
Hmm.
raised the issue of, if we're going to talk about letting Chinese EV manufacturers into the country, maybe the focus should not be on light duty, like cars and light trucks. It should
Right.
be on medium duty and heavy duty and construction equipment and things that are types of transportation and work equipment that is just now being electrified in China. They're way ahead of us on this. So why not bring an industry that's right on the cusp of growth? And we do have
Hmm.
some domestic manufacturers, like we have, Lion Electric in Quebec that makes buses. Do you know BYD, China's BYD actually makes buses in Canada already? They're here.
Yeah.
They're not making them at scale yet, but they're but
Yeah.
they're already here. So this is the growth area in transportation, is the things outside of your car. We have
Hmm.
to expand what we think our definition of what an electric vehicle is. It's all these other things, not just the car that's sitting in your driveway. And so we talked about building an industry here in Canada where we can go critical minerals, battery metals, battery cells, battery packs into EVs. Can we, as Canadians, build EVs that are geared to our strengths, like northern climates?
Right.
That could be our thing. We don't have
Hmm.
to sell, 5 or 10 million a year. Maybe we
Yeah.
sell, like right now, Canada makes 1.3 million vehicles a year and sells them almost exclusively into the US. So if we sold 1 million of these electric vehicles that were geared to, mining in the north, oil and gas in the north, hydroelectric in the north, whatever,
Yeah.
countries like Russia and Sweden and Norway and on and on that have cold climates and where batteries run down and you have other operating problems, that could be our niche. And the point here is to not just think in terms of climate. Oh my God, we need Chinese EVs to lower our emissions. No, 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 no,
Yeah.
no. Stop using a climate lens to look at energy related issues. Think of it in terms of technology and economics. And this is all about being strategic. Okay, our existing auto sector is under threat from Trump. We have to pivot to something or let it go entirely, which is what would
Yeah.
happen if the Chinese showed up with light duty
Yeah.
vehicles. We have to pivot to something. What do we pivot to? And we're suggesting here at Energy Media that it be medium and heavy duty vehicles and all of this other equipment. Our companies could partner with Chinese companies, which could bring new
Yep.
technologies and engineering, or we could invite the Chinese companies to set up here by themselves, or we could support our and scale up the companies that are already here, like Lion Electric and Green Power and New Flyer out of
BYD.
Winnipeg.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so there's all of these options that should be on the table and are not on the table, and we're trying to put them on the table. And so I had a Dimitri is a professor of business history at economic history at the University of Toronto. And he specializes in the auto sector, and we had just a really, really interesting conversation. So I suggest that you, yeah, have a watch. It's good stuff.
Well, you also had Michael Dunn on the show last week too, where he talked about China. Like, let's zoom out. We just talked about Canada specifically. If you zoom out to what's going on, China's iron grip on the EV supply.
Oh,
Michael really like walked us through how the Chinese EV sector pulled off this, quiet revolution, or maybe it was just Canadians, we had our blinders on and we weren't paying attention to what China was doing. And now it seems like quite a shock.
here's an interesting way of looking at this. Back in the day, American manufacturers of electronics ruled the global marketplace.
Yes. Hmm.
Then in the 80s and 90s, it shifted over to Japan. And then Korea
Right.
got into it a little bit and they became a major competitor. And then about
Hmm.
20 years, China turned its attention to electronics and it just absolutely dominated, right? Or
Yes.
dominates now the electronic supply chain. And
Hmm.
this is something Michael's talked about in previous interviews, is that the modern energy as a technology is fundamentally rooted in the electronics industry, not in the commodities industry. So when
Right.
we're talking about batteries for electric vehicles, the reason that China has a supply chain is because they started making batteries for, consumer electronics and for iPhones and all of this kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
over the last 20 years, they've developed these supply chains, and when they made the decision to scale up electric vehicle manufacturing and basically, eat the global auto industry, they already had a good foundation. And so while the auto industry was scaling up, the governments, and it's not just the national government in China, provincial governments, local governments play a big role in this. They scaled up the supply chains. And so now when you
Right.
look at Bloomberg NEF publishes these great graphs about, what percentage of a particular supply chain China dominates. And, it's like 80%, 90%, 95%. You want lithium processed into some, into whatever, I forget what the precursor is, you send it to China. So
Right.
you could extract lithium in Canada, but then you'd have to send it to China to get processed. So the idea is that North America has to build its own supply chain. And folks, Joe Biden, whether you like his politics or not, that's not the issue. The issue is the Biden administration very, very clearly saw this and said, we cannot be dependent upon China's supply chains because they are going to be our next major, that's Cold War 2.0. It's going to be with China.
Mm-hmm.
And if we get into a hot war with China, we're relying on them for drones, we're relying on them for batteries, we're relying on them for all of this, military technology, they're going to cut off our supply chains and we're dead in the water. That's as simple
Yeah.
as that. So they said, we are now going to build our own clean energy, our renewables and our electrotech industries, and we're going to scale them up. That's what Biden was doing. It wasn't just for climate reasons. That was just a little minor footnote. It was for national security reasons because
Right.
China is the next emerging superpower. Well, it already is a superpower. And the US, to maintain its own status, had to keep up. And then Trump has come along and just demolished all of that or set it back. He hasn't demolished it. It's still pretty vibrant. But nevertheless, that's where this is all going. And
Right.
and Canada has to decide where it's playing in this game because Trump isn't going to be around forever. And the US is going to have to at some point confront the rise of China like Biden did. And they're going to have to be, and frankly, there are already. Remember my interview with Jorge
Yeah.
Varga of Aspen
Mm-hmm.
Power in the US? He said,
Mm-hmm.
look, we don't, American manufacturers of solar panels and batteries, and they don't have to be as cheap as China. That's because that's not the cost anymore. That's not the big cost. The big cost is the integration, the
Yeah.
digital controls, the engineering, the construction, the permitting, that's now the bottleneck. So let's get away from this of, oh my God, we need China because we need cheap solar panels. No, those can be scaled down. They won't be quite as competitive as China. Doesn't matter.
Right.
It's still cheaper than the alternative. A solar panels plus a battery are cheaper than natural gas combined cycle plants. And they offer so much flexibility to industry and large commercial business, so much flexibility to consumers that there are other values other than the cost per watt of a solar panel.
Right.
And so that's where the US industry is going. And Canada has to make a decision about where it's going to play in that new sandbox. Now,
Yeah.
to give Prime Minister Mark Carney credit, he gets this on a conceptual level. He understands this is not anything new to the Prime Minister, but the Prime Minister is stuck in this. He understands the politics of it.
Right.
And he understands somebody has to pay. Here's an irony. I was reading some essay on the weekend, and they were saying, "Oh yeah, Mark Carney, he's pushing oil and gas because he has to generate enough revenue to pay for this other work that he wants to do." Hello, who else said that? That's Justin Trudeau from
Yes.
2016 when he when he approved the Trans Mountain expansion and the Line 3
Hmm.
pipeline projects. He said that. This was a big deal a decade ago. We will
Yeah.
build pipelines. We will sell oil and gas to the world to generate enough government revenue to pay for our energy transition. So Mark Carney is literally mouthing Justin Trudeau
True.
policies.
Yeah.
Only he's better at it because he's an economist. He understands conceptually understands it better. His narrative is better.
Yeah.
But don't kid yourself, folks. That's the direction because technology has changed and markets have changed. And that's what's driving this. It's not politics and it's not policy anymore. And the world is going to change whether Canada likes it or not. And we either are going to wind up being again a supplier of, a hewer of wood and drawer of water, or we're going to figure out how to play in those supply chains, add value to our resources, sell them around the world, and be a bigger player than we have before. So pitter patter, let's get at her.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the most shocking thing that came out of that video for me was just the cost, and we've talked about the economics here quite a bit, but they're making BYD's making a vehicle of about $8,000. I know that that's not available in Canada yet, but like this technology is getting so much cheaper. And so, if we're not from my point of view, I guess what I'm trying to say is we're running out of time. If we're not ready to step up very soon, I mean, China's going to eat our lunch.
I keep over the course of the last 3 years, I've referenced an interview I did with Bloomberg NEF's head of mining and metals, the whose name I still can't pronounce or remember. But I asked them, we were talking about this idea of taking critical minerals like copper and
Yeah.
lithium and refining them in Canada because as everybody knows, Canada is probably has the most potential in the world to be a critical minerals superpower, right?
Right.
We've got them all, but once you get them out of the ground, that's not enough. You
Hmm.
have to then refine and process them, smelt them into battery metals, and then battery metals go into battery cells, and battery cells go into battery packs, and then battery packs go into electric vehicles. That's kind of the supply chain. And
Right.
I asked him, I said, well, how long have we got? I was thinking maybe out to like 2035. He said, you have 2 to 5 years
Right.
because other countries, I mean, there's not a technology revolution anymore. Like the technology is available to everybody to do this
Yeah.
stuff. So it's all about infrastructure, it's all about regulatory regime, it's all about, and here's a major advantage that Canada has. It's a democracy, it has stable politics, and it has a very, very well-developed, respected, and stable legal system
Yeah.
because you can't if you're a mining company or a smelting company, whatever you are, and you want to invest in a country during a time of turbulence, you may cost a little more to operate in Canada, but you can know that when you sign a contract in Canada, it can be enforced.
Right.
That's a huge thing. It's one of our big competitive advantages. And it
Hmm.
gives us a competitive advantage over the US because look at what Trump is doing with the justice system. No one
Yeah.
can trust the justice system anymore because he stacked it with, on Trump 1.0, he stacked it with his appointees on the court. He's got the Supreme Court in his pocket, and he's basically grifting, in order to put money in his pocket using the federal government, on and on. So the American system has been destabilized, not Canada. We're
Right.
still, so that gives us one more competitive advantage to play in this. And while we have that competitive advantage, we ought to exploit it for everything it's worth. And to give Carney credit, we're going to be reporting in the next day or two about this critical minerals deal that was apparently reached on the
Yeah.
weekend.
G7.
We'll be
Hmm.
talking about that. And the federal budget comes down tomorrow. So we're going to be talking about
Yep.
that because Carney promised a clean energy industrial strategy, and it's supposed to be in the budget. And we'll see what that'll be a major focus of our reporting on the budget. That industrial strategy. What does it look like? Is it good? Is it not so good? So,
Yeah.
yeah. And getting back, just a final thought on your uh, uh, comments about Chinese electric vehicles.
Yeah.
Folks, this is, you've heard me talk many times about the graduate work I did, 40 years ago about the switch from horses to tractors. The
Yeah.
tractors that the horses were competing against the horses were initially really, really primitive. And they weren't
Hmm.
always in the 1920s. Not Canada, but the US Department of Agriculture did these studies where they said, okay, it costs X amount to plow an acre of land with a tractor. And then the competitive costs are this per acre for a two-horse team, a one-horse plow, a two-horse team, or a three-horse team. And what you see in the 20s is that, first of all, it was the one-horse team that it could compete against. Then it was the two-horse team. And then towards the end of the 1920s, the three-horse team became less competitive against the tractor, and tractor sales started to go like this because it's cheaper to do and more reliable, and there's all kinds of benefits to it.
Yeah.
Same thing with vehicles. Electric vehicles started out, they were expensive and they had limited range, and yeah, and China has scaled it up so that now this is just the 2020s is just like the 1920s when the automobile and the horse. And the competition here is the internal combustion engine versus the electric motor and batteries.
Yeah.
That's the competition. And China has proven that the combination of a battery and an electric motor is superior, it's lower cost and better than an internal combustion engine and gasoline. That is the fundamental truth of the internet of the global energy system at this point, and it will be out to 2025. And so all the stuff you were talking about, an $8,000 dolphin in,
Yeah.
in China, and maybe it gets to be 20,000 in Mexico once you pile on tariffs, but would be a lot
Right.
cheaper if you took the tariffs off. All of that stuff is what's propelling the transition that is going to affect Canada. And if we don't get up, if we don't recognize that as a threat, as a risk to the economy that we have, we are going to get blindsided, right? When elbows
And
up,
left behind.
you know what? Let's take the elbows up hockey analogy, because
Yeah.
I played junior hockey in the 70s, and you can't. It's not enough to keep your elbows up, and hockey players will recognize your head has to be on a swivel.
Yes. Yeah.
Your
Um,
head. Hang on, I just want to finish. Sorry, folks, that was my cell phone going off. I forgot to put it on. Your head has to be on a swivel, right? You better be looking around you for Scott Stevens you're going to take your head off with a big body check. And
yeah.
our head is not on a swivel. We are just going up and down with the puck, thinking, "Woohoo! We're Wayne Gretzky. Look at us go!" And the Chinese are coming onto the ice they're like the Russians in the 1970s. You wouldn't
Right.
remember this, but I saw the Russian hockey team play the Thompson Hawks in 1970 in 1971. They beat them 21-1. And
Wow.
everybody was shocked. We thought, well, because we were Canada, right? We dominated hockey.
Right.
And it was an absolute eye opener. So when the 72 Summit Series came along, the 8-game series, that's a big part of
Yep.
Canadian hockey lore, I had seen them in action. I was only like 13 at the time. And I
Right.
said, oh no, it's not going to be a cakewalk. We're going to and sure enough, we got our ass handed to us. We pulled it
Yeah.
out at the last minute with Paul Henderson's goal. Otherwise, we would have been the losers. And that's the analogy here. Just like the Russians snuck up on us 50, 60 years ago in hockey, China has snuck up on us in terms of the energy technologies and all of,
Right.
electric vehicles and stuff. And we haven't recognized it yet. And we here at Energy Media, we're like little Markham going to watch that game in 1971 and going, holy moly, that's a peek into the future. And was it not? That is
Yeah.
exactly what it was. All those Russian players came over in the 80s and 90s, dominated the NHL. That's the analogy here, folks. And so pay attention. Head on a swivel as well as elbows up.
Well, let's turn our focus now to Canada. There was, I mean, Danielle Smith was out last week trying to with Bill 2. Let's say that was rushed through the legislature, and we had quite a bit of discussion over what is Bill 2, what does it mean to put the teachers back to work, what is the notwithstanding clause, and so tell me what's the labor movement's
Okay,
reply to all of
so
this?
there was a 3 week strike by the Alberta teachers, and
Right,
so they were out on the picket line, and um, the Smith government in Alberta brought in back to work legislation. Now,
right,
had they done that without using the notwithstanding clause, there are very well prescribed policy or processes set out in
process.
in labor relations
Hmm.
legislation in Alberta. And the problem is that it might not have gone the government's way. And so this was not just about bringing teachers back and getting kids back into school and taking the burden off parents. It was about breaking unions. And that's
Right.
and this is no surprise. I mean, it sounds a little bit like it's almost conspiracy theory, but Jason Kenney was, when he was premier from 2019 to 2022, talked about this. Smith
Hmm.
talked about this. They hate unions. They want
Yeah,
to break the back of unions because that raises costs for employers on the labor side. And so
right,
what they did is they brought their back to work legislation, Bill 2, the Back to School Act, and they use Section 33 of the Constitution, which is the notwithstanding clause, to exempt it from judicial review. So what that means is essentially the right to bargain was effectively ended on this particular strike, and it's never been done before. Doug Ford threatened it in 2022 and had to backpedal
back
because
down.
there was so
Hmm.
much public. So the problem here is that if Smith is allowed to get away with this, it will become standard fare for governments across the country that when they're faced with political inconvenience, right, they will take the notwithstanding clause out and impose legislation on striking workers or whatever it might be to get their way. And so this is the canary in the mine shaft.
Right,
And if Smith gets away with this, there isn't enough political pressure put on her. The notwithstanding clause will be regularly used by Canadian governments to override the rights of labor and then the rights of whoever. I mean, it'll anytime you want your legislation to not be challenged in court, you invoke the notwithstanding
right,
clause, and it's a political freebie for you. So I mean, that's why Energy Media got into this, is because we've been doing a series, and I did a bunch last week. So I'd encourage you to check out our Trump Project 2025 and Canada playlist on YouTube, because we interviewed um, American
academics.
experts about
Hmm.
Trump's assault on the administrative state. So the administrative
Yeah.
state, often called deep state by the MAGA crowd, is
Hmm.
essentially the machinery of government. Well, if you include the military, there are 4 million people employed by the federal government in the US. It's big, and it delivers all sorts of services.
Hmm.
And Trump, because he's implementing the Project 2025 blueprint, which is not about Christian nationalist state and all of the stuff that usually gets the headlines. It is a 900-page blueprint to end the administrative state and to basically break the machinery of government and transfer those functions, either end those functions or transfer them out into the private sector. So when you're done, you have this little tiny government that can't interfere with people who, with corporations who want to, I don't know what, ignore environmental laws. Doesn't matter because the state has no way to enforce them. And
Right.
so the point here, and this is why we're doing this, is you can draw a line between what Trump 2.0 is doing in attacking the
The US.
administrative state in the U.S. You can draw a direct line to what Danielle Smith is doing in Alberta. So Trump 1.0 pushed the boundaries. Where are the
Right.
guardrails? And he had some competent people around him and so on. So he was limited the first time around. Trump 2.0 learned from Trump 1.0 and just is completely smashing. Sometimes Trump takes a sledgehammer to the machinery. Sometimes he takes, he dismantles it, and sometimes it's just throwing sand in the gears of the machinery, so eventually it'll wear out and break. So there's lots of different strategies, but the thing is to attack the machinery of government. Smith is doing it. It will spread elsewhere. And here's the kicker, and why we're interested in it is because China, Europe, and other Southeast Asian countries that are competing with us in the energy economy are using government to further, they're using industrial strategies and policies to push their economic agenda. The only reason China is where it is because the central government and other Chinese
Yeah.
governments have been employing industrial policy for the last 20 years. And so if we allow the Trumps and the Smiths to dismantle the machinery of government, they dismantle one of the biggest tools that we have to push back economically against China and other global competitors. So there's an economic angle to this that we haven't been talking about. We need to.
Right. And I mean, so we covered the education aspect. And then last week, you also did an interview. Did a deep dive into a paper that Smith published in 2021 where she talks about her healthcare plan. And so, again, we're relating this to the ungoverning work we saw by Trump into, okay, maybe she's taken her first step now with education, but what has she got planned for healthcare, Markham?
A lot of our viewers are based in Alberta, and they complain a lot about the changes that have been undertaken in healthcare and how it's made the system more cumbersome. And, they've privatized a lot of services, like some of the surgical services, imaging services, lab services that are being
Right.
pushed out into the private sector. So this is
Hmm.
like Smith 1.0, right? Push, push, push. See where you can see how to do it, learn how to do it, see
Hmm.
how you can manage political expectations around it, and how much you can change over time till you get to the point where you can just bring out the sledgehammers and you don't have to pretend anymore, like
Right.
Trump 2.0, when we're going to
Right.
get to Smith 2.0 at some point. Even if it is a Smith, could be another premier, but if it's a
Hmm.
UCP premier, this is what they're going to do. And so I interviewed Dr. Lorian Hardcastle because in 2021, before she became premier, Danielle Smith wrote a paper for the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary. And it was all about, she started with the premise that the Alberta government cannot afford to pay for universal Medicare in the way that we have for the last 60 years. And so there people have to, and this is it's not a quote, but I'm paraphrasing. People have to get used to paying out of their pocket.
Yeah.
So you don't throw a hand grenade in and blow it up. You start throwing sand in the machine. And that's what she's doing. She wants to bring in health savings account. So people wind up having it's a first step towards, the health insurance kind of model that the Americans use.
Right.
And she's doing all of these things. And Dr. Hardcastle is a professor of law who specializes in healthcare and public health. And so she understands, she's been through this paper and we unpacked it together. But this is Danielle Smith 1.0, and you see it in energy, right?
Hmm.
You see it in other parts of Alberta. And public education is another part of Alberta's administrative state. Public education, public health care, public
Right.
energy policy. It all fits together. This is not random. That there's a strategy here behind all of these moves and that are being coming out of the Alberta Premier's office, and healthcare is one. And so we unpacked Smith's blueprint for change for healthcare in that interview.
Yeah, and I mean the big come away from that for me was things are being driven right now by ideology, not by evidence. So ideology is driving reform, not the evidence for what Canadians and maybe taxpayers need. So, we're not going to drive towards a system that's more equitable. We're going to be driving towards, a system that's dominated by neoliberal principles and whatnot. So it's a really important interview. I think it definitely helps me draw, draw a line and connect the stories of last week.
back in the day. So Alison Redford was a premier of Alberta. I forget when she took over from Snellmack, probably around 2011, 2012. And her justice minister was a lawyer named Jonathan Dennis from Calgary. Now,
Hmm.
Jonathan has since gone on to all sorts of political problems. You Google him, you'll see what I mean. But at the time, he was reasonably well respected, and he was very right wing. He actually originally came from Saskatchewan. He was very right wing, and but he was nice enough to we were starting our online journalism in Calgary at that time, and he gave me many interviews. He would, and so one of the things I'll never forget this. He said, "Look, I like the private economy." He said, "But we did a study and we found that if somebody was homeless, and by the time they went through the justice system and the healthcare system and the public health, all of these
Yep.
different systems, he said that person cost the Alberta government $100,000 a year. He said, put them in a house, house them, give them some services, welfare
The
services.
basics.
So yeah, you make sure they're fed and they're not, help treat their addiction problems. $24,000. He said,
Wow.
he said, helping people is actually the best thing the government can do. It's the lowest cost way to deal with homelessness rather than, you know, taking things away from them, trying to get them off the street, force them off the street, or penalize them for being on the street. And
Yep.
he said, and essentially the argument he was making is ideology would tell you to do one thing, that's the most expensive. That's the highest cost option and the least effective option. And the evidence, however, says that you should do this thing, which is provide them with a home and all and so on. And what Lorian Hardcastle said over and over again is that ideology is driving Alberta healthcare, not
Yeah.
evidence. And
Yeah.
these interviews I did with Jonathan Dennis 12, 13, 14 years ago are exactly like that. The evidence says put them in a home, give them a home, provide all these supports, and it's a better outcome for everybody and lower cost, and not ideology. But now Smith's ideology is driving the healthcare agenda in Alberta. And it's pretty clear, I think, that ideology is also driving her education agenda in Alberta. And it's driving the energy policy agenda in Alberta. And that's why we're seeing a drift towards the MAGA culture, the MAGA approach, the Trump influence. And
Yeah.
Smith, in a way, is a Canadian provincial version of Trump. She can be very charismatic, and she I often say her superpower is that she makes batshit crazy sound rational.
Hmm.
That's her superpower, and she honed it over 9 years of being a conservative radio talk show host in Calgary. She learned that skill and now she's employing it as premier. But when you look behind the curtain, remember the Wizard of Oz at the end of the movie
Yeah.
where Dorothy and all the crew pull back the curtain and it's some old dude with some levers and he's making the whole of Oz work and make it look like magic and it's just some guy with levers, right?
Yeah.
We need to pull back the curtain. And we need to explain what the agenda is in rational terms, in economic terms, in data-driven, evidence-driven terms, so that folks like those in our audience understand what's going on.
So you've heard it here, folks. Mark and I are trying to pull back the curtain for you on what's really going on. And these videos, we're going to continue with the Project 2025 videos. We're obviously going to cover some more of what Daniel Smith does this week, and maybe some more about what the labor response will be on, you know, possibly a general strike, as Gil McGowan said last week. And if you like our content, what I'm asking you now is to subscribe, like our videos, subscribe to our channel. If you can, join our channel by purchasing a membership. We really greatly appreciate that support. And also, don't forget about the Substack. Subscribe to that so you're going to get access to that new essay series that we're going to start publishing.
Right?
Well,
At
we
no
started last
cost.
week
There's no
at
cost.
no cost. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Our Substack subscriptions are completely free. And yeah, and I think I just want to thank everyone again for joining us. And Markham, I'm going to hand it over to you for the last word.
Folks, I spent the weekend searching for energy demand modeling assumptions. Boy, that sounds boring. I have the most boring life around, right? But this is going to be some work we're going to be doing very, very soon. And the essence of our opposition to pipelines and expansion of the oil sands is that the the oil demand forecasts from OPEC, from ExxonMobil, from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, from the International Energy Agency steps, which are all business as usual or business expanding narratives. Okay.
Hmm.
And what we did is we categorized or we detailed all of the assumptions behind the modeling. And then
Right.
what we're going to do in our upcoming essays and videos is we're going to compare the assumptions to the evidence as we know it today. And I can tell you, folks, that the preliminary work that we've done on this shows that all of the assumptions and modeling that drives Prime Minister Mark Carney, Federal Energy Minister Tim Hodgson, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, BC Premier David Eby is wrong. It doesn't match the evidence. It doesn't. It's more the International Energy Agency's APS scenario, which shows oil demand falling from 103 million barrels a day to 55 by 2050, which would decimate Alberta's oil and gas oil industry. And then we
Sector.
see something similar in gas. Watch for that work because this is really important work. Nobody else in Canada is doing this, not academic economists, not uh, the Canadian Energy Regulator. Nobody is doing this kind of work, and it's the fundamental underpinning of the Canadian energy narrative that we're getting at. Why do people like Tim Hodgson say, "Oh my God, we need to build pipelines because there's so much market out there"? No, there isn't. No, there isn't. And we're going to be, tomorrow is the federal budget, right? And a lot of this
Yep.
stuff is going to be strategy and policy are going to be in that budget. Watch for our coverage of it because that's what we're going to be focusing on. And I can tell you, this gets back to continuity, gets back to how Canadians think about the future. And we need to stop muddling through and take control. So
Exactly.
now I'll be quiet because I could go on ramble on this stuff for yammer about this for hours. Anyway, thank you very
Well, we
much.
appreciate your comments below, and also we also replied to all those comments on Substack. So let's get this conversation going. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next week.